Trapped inside my own body after the fall, I could only listen. My own sister's voice cut through the silence, and what she said to our family doctor still chills my soul. It's a mercy killing at this point. Finish her now. My name is Lauren Caldwell, and at 38 years old, I learned that the silence of your own mind can be the most terrifying scream. Consciousness didn't return to me in a gentle wave. It was a brutal slam against a wall of paralysis. The first thing I registered was the sterile, lemon-scented air of a private hospital room, the kind our family's donations had probably helped build here in Charleston. The second was the rhythmic, almost hypnotic beep of a heart monitor keeping time with my silent panic. I was trapped, a ghost in the machine of my own body. Then, I heard their voices, soft and conspiratorial, slicing through the fog. My sister, Brooke, and Dr. Alistair Finch, a man who'd bandaged my scraped knees since I was 5. The fall was severe, Dr. Finch said, his tone a clinical caress that made my skin crawl. The swelling on the brainstem, she's not coming back from this, Brooke. My sister's voice was smoother, laced with a practiced grief. Then we're doing her a kindness. It's what she would want. No one should live like this. A beat of silence, then Finch's chilling conclusion. A slight increase in her potassium drip. It will look like cardiac arrest. Peaceful. No one will question it. The floor fell out of my silent world. The fall from my horse, Caspian, was it just a convenient accident? As the sole heir to the Caldwell Hotel empire, my death would make everything so much simpler for Brooke. Before I tell you how I fought back from inside a prison of my own flesh, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Just drop your city or state in the comments so I know we're in this together. I needed to fight, but how do you defeat a monster when you can't even open your eyes? Lying there, suspended in the amber of my own memories, the why began to crystallize with horrifying clarity. Brooke and I were two sides of a tarnished silver dollar, minted from the same Charleston legacy, but destined for different fates. I was the architect, the one who spent my summers learning the hospitality trade from the ground up, from checking in guests at our flagship hotel on Meeting Street to poring over expansion blueprints with my father. I understood the weight of our name. Brooke, just 2 years younger, was the ornament. She wore our name like a designer gown, effortlessly beautiful, charming everyone at the Spolito Festival galas, but utterly uninterested in the foundation that held it all up. Our parents' love was a tide that was supposed to lift both our boats, but I was the deep-water vessel, and she was the leisure yacht, and she resented the ocean for its depth. If you've ever felt the sting of being compared to a sibling, or have a story about that kind of rivalry, I want you to know you're not alone. Maybe just type "I understand" in the comments so we can acknowledge that shared feeling. The breaking point had been 6 months ago after our parents were lost in a sudden squall during their annual sail to Hilton Head. The will reading was a somber affair in a stuffy law office downtown. Brooke was granted a trust fund that could sustain a small nation, the historic townhouse south of Broad, the beach house on Sullivan's Island. But the controlling interest in the Caldwell collection, the keys to the entire kingdom, that legacy was entrusted to me. I'll never forget the look on her face. It wasn't loud or explosive. It was a terrifying calm, a mask of practiced disappointment that slipped for just a second, revealing the cold, hard fury beneath. "Daddy always knew best," she'd murmured, and the chill in her voice could have frozen the Ashley River. That single, venomous sentence, "Daddy always knew best," echoed from the lawyer's office into my silent hospital room, and suddenly, the memory of my fall ignited in my mind. It wasn't the fuzzy, chaotic recollection of an accident. It was a series of sharp, distinct frames. I was riding Caspian, my powerful bay thoroughbred, along the oak-lined trail bordering the Wando River on our family's estate. The air was thick with the scent of saltwater and pine, a scent I'd always associated with peace. It was my sanctuary. I was thinking about Brooke, about how I could possibly bridge the chasm that had opened between us, when I urged Caspian into a canter toward a low stone wall we'd cleared 1,000 times. But as he gathered himself to jump, something felt profoundly wrong. It wasn't a spook or a stumble. It was a violent, unnatural lurch to the side. I remember the distinct, sharp sound of snapping leather and the horrifying sensation of the entire saddle slipping from beneath me. I was airborne for a split second, long enough to see the moss-covered ground rushing up to meet me. My last conscious thought was the sickening, final crack as my helmeted head struck a stone. At the time, the stable master had been beside himself with apologies. "A freak equipment failure," he'd said. "The saddle's cinch strap must have had a hidden weak spot. A 1 in a million chance." But now, piecing it together in the dark, I knew better. A weak spot or a carefully sliced one. The fall wasn't their first plan. It was just the one that had failed. This hospital room, this plot, this was simply their second attempt to finish the job. With this newfound, horrifying clarity, my hospital room transformed from a place of healing into a tomb. My consciousness was a lit room in a house with every door and window bricked over. I was buried alive inside myself. The days bled into one another, marked only by the shifting light through the blinds I couldn't see and the routine invasions of my privacy. Nurses would come in, their voices pitched with that gentle, pitying tone reserved for the vegetative. They'd turn my body with practiced efficiency, change the bags of fluid that kept me alive, and chat about their weekend plans, all while I was screaming, a silent, primal roar trapped behind my teeth. My entire universe shrank to the squeak of rubber soles on polished tile, the distant chime of an elevator, and the steady, mocking beep of the machine that told the world I was alive. Even as my sister was planning my death just a few feet away, Brooke was a frequent visitor. She'd sit by my bed, scrolling through her phone, taking business calls as if she'd already inherited my life. She'd complain to a friend about the price of orchids for a gala, or debate selling off one of our smaller boutique hotels in Savannah. I was no longer her sister. I was a piece of unfinished business, a portrait on the wall she was waiting to take down. The true torture wasn't just hearing the whispers of the plot, it was the casual cruelty of her normalcy, the ease with which she moved through the world while mine had stopped. It's a terrifying feeling, to be screaming and have no one hear you. Have you ever felt truly invisible or unheard in a critical moment in your life? You don't have to share the details, but if you have, just type the number 1 in the comments, so I know I'm not the only one who understands that particular kind of silence. I had started to believe my tomb was perfectly sealed, that my fate was written on a medical chart in invisible ink. But hope, I learned, doesn't always arrive like a cavalry charge. Sometimes it's a quiet, stubborn woman with sensible shoes and an unwavering belief in protocol. Her name was Brenda, a veteran night nurse with tired eyes that had seen everything and a voice that could cut through steel. She wasn't sentimental, she treated me with the same brusque efficiency as everyone else, but she missed nothing. One Tuesday night, well after midnight, Dr. Finch made an unexpected visit. The air in the room grew heavy, and I could hear him quietly instructing the junior nurse on duty to add something new to my IV drip. A supplement to help with neuroresponsiveness, he'd said, his voice a little too smooth. The younger nurse was preparing the line when Brenda entered on her final rounds. I heard her pause, the rustle of paper as she picked up my chart. "Doctor, this dosage of verapamil is 3 times the standard protocol for a patient in her condition," she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. Finch's voice was dismissive. "I'm the attending physician, Brenda. I'm attempting a more aggressive therapy." But Brenda was unmovable. "Of course, doctor. In that case, hospital policy requires a sign-off from the chief of neurology for any dosage this far outside standard guidelines. I'll just page him." The silence that followed was electric. I could feel Finch's fury and his panic warring with each other. "Never mind," he finally snapped. "I'll reassess in the morning." He left without another word. Brenda had no idea, but in that moment, with her simple, dogged adherence to the rules, she had just become the first crack in the wall of my prison. She had just bought me time. Brenda's small act of defiance bought me a few more days, a precious, fragile pocket of time where I simply existed, praying for a miracle. And then, one Thursday morning, the miracle walked in. He wasn't what I expected. His name was Daniel, a new physical therapist, and his voice was different from the others. It wasn't laced with pity or clinical detachment. It was calm, respectful, and directed at me, not the chart at the foot of my bed. "Good morning, Lauren," he said, his voice a low baritone that seemed to vibrate in the quiet room. "My name is Daniel. I've just transferred from the neurological rehab center at Duke. I'll be working with you to maintain your muscle tone." As he began the gentle, passive range of motion exercises on my limbs, he spoke to me as if I were his partner in the process. We need to keep these pathways open. Keep everything limber and ready. Unlike Dr. Finch's narrative of finality, Daniel's language was full of potential, of a future. He was meticulous, his touch firm and confident. I learned later that his specialty was traumatic brain injuries and disorders of consciousness. He knew the subtle signs that a standard EEG could miss. And he saw one. As he was gently rotating my ankle, he made a note from my chart. Says here the fall was from your horse, Caspian. At the sound of my beloved horse's name, a jolt of grief and love shot through me. I felt it as a purely internal event, but Daniel's eyes flickered to the monitor beside my bed. He didn't say anything, but I knew he'd seen it, the small, sharp spike in my heart rate. For anyone else, it was a meaningless blip. But for a man trained to look for ghosts in the machine, it was a clue. That small spike on the monitor was all Daniel needed. He knew he was onto something. He stopped treating our sessions as just physical. They became investigations. He started talking to me, not about the weather, but about my life, pulling details from my admission files. He was searching for a key, the one thing that could unlock an emotional response my body couldn't suppress. During our next session, after stretching my unresponsive limbs, he sat quietly beside my bed. His voice was gentle. "Lauren," he started, "I was reading about your family's company, the Caldwell Collection. Your father founded it. I read about his passing last year, alongside your mother. They must have been incredibly proud of you, carrying on their legacy." His words were a direct hit. He spoke of my parents not as names on a chart, but as people. Suddenly, the image of my father, his warm smile as he taught me to sail in the harbor, and my mother, her elegant hands arranging flowers at the Grand Caldwell, flooded my mind. The grief I had suppressed, the raw, unprocessed agony of losing them, and the devastating pain of knowing their other daughter was trying to kill me, it all swelled into an unbearable pressure behind my eyes. I fought it, but I was powerless. A single, hot tear broke free from my right eye and traced a slow, silent path down my temple. Daniel gasped, a sharp intake of breath. He leaned in, his face close to mine. "Lauren? You're in there. You can hear me, can't you?" In answer, a second tear followed the first. It was a dam breaking. It was my soul screaming yes. Have you ever had a moment where a single tear said everything you couldn't put into words? Whether it was from grief or from joy, share a time you felt that way in the comments below. It's a reminder of how powerfully our emotions can speak for us. In that moment, I wasn't alone anymore. I had an ally. The elation of being seen was immediately followed by a cold wave of terror. Daniel understood it instantly. His entire demeanor shifted from compassionate therapist to covert strategist. He gently wiped my tears away, his movements calm and deliberate as he continued stretching my arm, a perfect performance for anyone who might glance into the room. "Okay, Lauren," he whispered, his voice barely a breath of sound. "Listen to me very carefully. We cannot let them know you're aware. Not Dr. Finch, not your sister. Your life depends on them believing you are gone. Do you understand?" I couldn't blink, not yet, but I screamed yes in my mind. He had to know I understood. During his next visit, he came prepared. Shielding me from the door's small window with his body, he laid out the plan. "The muscles that control your eyelids are often spared in brainstem injuries," he explained quietly. "It's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done, but I need you to try. I'm going to ask a question. If the answer is yes, I want you to pour every ounce of your will into blinking once. Just one slow, deliberate blink." It felt like trying to lift 1,000 pounds with a single thread. My brain fired the command, but my eyelids were lead weights. He asked the first question. "Is your name Lauren?" I focused on that single, simple truth, channeling all my fear and rage and hope into my eyelids. A flicker. Then, a slow, heavy, unmistakable blink. A triumphant but silent sigh escaped Daniel's lips. Over the next few sessions, we perfected it. 1 blink for yes, 2 for no. The questions grew more serious. "Do you remember the fall?" 1 blink. And then, the one that hung in the air between us like a drawn blade. "Lauren, are you afraid they're trying to harm you?" A single hard blink. It wasn't a question anymore. It was a declaration of war. That single, affirmative blink transformed Daniel. The professional concern in his eyes hardened into a steely resolve. In our next session, his voice was low and urgent. Lauren, your word against theirs isn't enough. They would paint me as a delusional therapist and you as a phantom. We need their own words. The implication was terrifying and exhilarating. We were moving beyond survival. We were starting to hunt. He showed me a small device that looked exactly like a USB phone charger. It's a voice-activated recorder, he whispered. I'll plug it into the outlet behind your bed. They'll never notice it. The next morning, while pretending to check the connections on my monitors, he did it. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild drumbeat I prayed the machine wouldn't betray. For the rest of the day, I lay there, acutely aware of the tiny electronic ear waiting in the shadows. I didn't have to wait long. That evening, Brooke and Dr. Finch came in, their voices relaxed, confident in their solitude. Alistair, I'm running out of time. Brooke's voice was a sharp, impatient hiss. My creditors aren't as understanding as you are. Finch was the voice of caution. We must be patient. That night nurse, Brenda, she's too by the book. One more flagged order and the whole thing comes crashing down. We need to document a steady decline first. Then came the words that the tiny device captured, words that would seal their fates. Fine, Brooke conceded. But when you do it, it has to be perfect. A simple cardiac failure. I'll be the devastated sister. You'll be the heroic doctor who did everything he could. Finch's reply was cold, clinical, and utterly damning. Of course. The potassium chloride is fast-acting. By the time anyone finds her, it will be untraceable. Hearing that was a whole new level of cold. It makes you question who you can really trust. Have you ever put your faith in someone completely, only to find out they weren't who you thought they were? Share a yes or no in the comments. I think many of us have a story there. With the recording safely retrieved, Daniel and I had their conspiracy in our hands. But he knew that a recording, obtained illegally, might not be enough. It could be challenged in court. They could claim it was taken out of context. To build an unshakable case, we needed someone on the inside. We needed to flip an accomplice. That's where Tyler came in. Tyler was Brooke's boyfriend of the last year, a handsome but weak-willed man who managed one of our hotels in Savannah. I knew Brooke had gotten him the job, and he seemed to worship the ground she walked on, always hovering anxiously at her side during family events. In my silent observation post, I'd seen the cracks forming. He'd visit with Brooke, but he couldn't look at me. His hands would tremble as he held his coffee cup, and his laughter was always a little too loud, a little too forced. The guilt was consuming him. Daniel decided to take a massive gamble. He cornered Tyler in the hospital's all-night coffee shop after seeing him and Brooke have a hushed, frantic argument in the hallway. Daniel was brilliant. He didn't lead with the recording. He started with the saddle. I've been reading the incident report on Lauren's fall. Daniel said calmly, sitting opposite a visibly rattled Tyler. A clean slice through a leather cinch like that, it doesn't happen from wear and tear. It looks like it was cut with a very sharp blade. Tyler's face went white as a sheet. He started to stammer out a denial, but Daniel pressed on, his voice low and firm. Brooke is building a narrative, and right now, you're her loose end. When this all comes down, who do you think she's going to point the finger at? The grieving sister, or the boyfriend with a gambling problem who she got a job for? The mention of his gambling, a detail Daniel must have dug up, was the final blow. Tyler didn't confess, not right there. But he broke. He simply nodded, a man utterly defeated. He agreed to meet Daniel the next day, off the hospital grounds. The conspiracy was beginning to unravel from the inside. The next day, Tyler met Daniel at a quiet coffee shop miles away from the hospital and confessed everything. The story poured out of him in a torrent of guilt and fear. His gambling debts, Brooks leveraging them against him, and the lie she'd sold him that cutting the cinch would only cause a minor fall. Just enough to scare me into sharing the inheritance more freely. But he also gave us the most critical piece of information. A deadline. Brooke's creditors were closing in, and she was done waiting. She had given Dr. Finch an ultimatum. The final act was scheduled for Friday night at the 11 p.m. shift change when the floor was at its most chaotic. We had less than 48 hours. Armed with Tyler's confession and the damning recording, Daniel knew he had to bypass the normal channels. Dr. Finch was a pillar of the Charleston community. A simple report could get buried in politics. Instead, Daniel went straight to the top. The hospital's chief administrator, a formidable woman named Evelyn Reed, a former district attorney with a reputation for being incorruptible. In her locked office, he laid out the entire nightmare. She listened with a stone-faced expression, but when Daniel played the recording, her eyes narrowed. She didn't hesitate. She made one secure call to a detective she trusted in the state's major crimes unit. A trap was set. Plainclothes officers would pose as janitorial staff. A pinhole camera, disguised as a new thermostat, would be installed in my room. Tyler's job was to keep Brooke calm and on schedule. And I, the silent, paralyzed woman in the bed, would be the bait. It's one thing to know the truth, but it's another thing entirely to build a plan and fight back. If you've ever had to make a brave choice to stand up for what's right, even when it was terrifying, just type brave in the comments. Let's celebrate that strength. Friday night arrived with the suffocating stillness that precedes a storm. My room was dark, the only light coming from the machines that tethered me to life. I was intensely aware of every detail. The new thermostat on the wall that was actually a camera, the quiet janitor down the hall who was actually a detective. My body was the bait, and the trap was set. Daniel had squeezed my hand an hour earlier, a silent promise that I wasn't alone, before joining the police in a surveillance room. The clock on the monitor ticked past 10:55 p.m. Every beat of my heart felt like a drum signaling their approach, and I fought to keep my panic from sending the rhythm into a giveaway frenzy. At 10:58, the door handle turned with a soft click. Dr. Finch entered first, dressed in dark scrubs to blend in with the night staff. Brooke followed, her expensive perfume a sickeningly sweet herald of death. She leaned over me, her face a cold, beautiful mask. "You always did have to be the center of attention, Lauren," she whispered. "Even in death." Finch was already at my forepole, a syringe in his gloved hand. The clear liquid inside, potassium chloride, glinted in the dim light. "It will be painless," he murmured, more to himself than to me, as he swabbed the injection port. In that split second, as his thumb pressed down on the plunger, the world exploded. "Police! Don't move." The door flew open, and the room was instantly flooded with armed officers. The janitor was there, his weapon drawn. Daniel burst in right behind them, his eyes finding mine with a look of profound relief as he placed himself between me and my attackers. Finch froze, the syringe still in his hand, a perfect tableau of his crime. Brooke, however, let out a feral scream of pure rage and lunged for me, trying to rip the IV from my arm before an officer tackled her to the ground. The sharp, definitive click of handcuffs was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. In the aftermath, my world was a blur of police statements, hospital administrators, and the blessed quiet of knowing I was finally safe. With Dr. Finch removed from my case, a new team of neurologists started aggressive therapies, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of movement in my right index finger. I was coming back. But even as my body slowly began to wake, a question haunted me. Was all of this truly just about money? The venom in Brooke's heart felt older, deeper than that. The answer came from a place I never expected, my father's private safe. As the family's attorneys began organizing the estate, they uncovered a locked file box. Inside was a secret that completely reframed my entire life. It wasn't just adoption papers, which revealed Brooke had been adopted as an infant, a secret my parents had kept from everyone, including us. It was what came with them. My father, a meticulous man, had recently undertaken a private investigation, including a DNA test. The results confirmed Brooke wasn't his biological child, but they also revealed a truth that struck me like a physical blow. Her biological father was Garrison Hayes, our family's most ruthless business rival for over 40 years. Tucked with the results was a letter my father had drafted, dated just 3 days before his and my mother's fatal sailing accident. In it, he poured out his heart, assuring Brooke that biology meant nothing, that she was his daughter in every way that mattered, but that he felt she deserved the truth. He had never sent it. And I was left with a chilling, terrible new question. Had Brooke found those papers? And was my accident not the second murder attempt in our family, but the third? It's amazing how one secret can change the entire story of a family. Do you believe it's better to know a painful truth or to live with a comfortable lie? Type truth or lie in the comments. I'm genuinely curious what you think. 8 months later, the woman who entered the Charleston County Correctional Facility was not the same one who had laid helpless in a hospital bed. My voice was a permanent, raspy whisper, and I walked with the aid of a cane, but I walked on my own. Daniel and my attorneys urged me not to go, but I had to. The trial was a formality. The evidence was absolute. What I needed was not justice, but truth. I needed to look into the eyes of the woman I once called my sister. We sat opposite each other, separated by a thick pane of smudged plexiglass, the air crackling with a lifetime of unspoken things. She was smaller without her designer clothes, her beauty hard and brittle under the harsh fluorescent lights. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I simply held a copy of our father's unsent letter against the glass. Her eyes scanned it, and for a moment, the mask of indifference cracked. "You knew," I said, my voice raspy but firm. She picked up the phone. "I found the DNA results in his desk a week before they went sailing," she admitted, her voice flat. "Not the letter. Just the proof that my whole life was a lie." I held her gaze. "Did you kill them, Brooke?" Her laugh was a sharp, ugly sound. "They were already dead to me. They took a little trip. A storm rolled in." Convenient, wasn't it? It wasn't a confession, but it was an answer. Then I delivered the final truth, the one I had discovered in the complete estate documents. "He was going to give you half. Not just the money, Brooke. Half the company. Equal voting shares. The letter says it all. He didn't see biology, he saw his daughters." For the first time, I saw true devastation on her face. The entire foundation of her rage, the grand injustice she had built her life upon, was a lie. She had destroyed us all for nothing. I walked away from that prison, leaving the ghost of my sister behind with the ruins of the lies she'd built. The trial was swift. With the recordings, Tyler's testimony, and my own, Brooke was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole in 30 years. Dr. Finch took a plea deal for a lesser sentence of 20. Justice was served, but I realized true victory wouldn't be found in a courtroom. It had to be built in my own life. My recovery became my sole focus. The first time I stood on my own 2 feet was a triumph greater than any business deal I'd ever closed. The first time I could hold a pen and sign my own name felt like reclaiming my very identity. The Caldwell collection was waiting for me, not as a prize to be won, but as a legacy to be redefined. I didn't just step back into my father's shoes, I forged a new path. I established a new philanthropic branch of the company, the Caspian Initiative, named for the horse who shared my last moments of freedom. We began funding cutting-edge research and providing grants to families of patients with disorders of consciousness, turning the source of my deepest trauma into a wellspring of hope for others. My relationship with Daniel evolved too, growing from a bond forged in crisis to a partnership built in the quiet moments of my recovery. He had seen me at my most vulnerable, a silent prisoner in my own body, and had never once looked away. One evening, as we sat on a bench overlooking the Charleston harbor, he took my hand, the one that still trembled slightly, and I knew I wasn't just a survivor. I was beginning a new life, one defined not by the sister who tried to end me, but by the people who helped me begin again. My sister believed our family's legacy was something you could find on a deed or a stock certificate, something that could be stolen, inherited, or killed for. She was wrong. The true inheritance my parents left me wasn't the Caldwell collection. It was a quiet, unshakable strength I never knew I possessed until it was all I had left. The betrayal I endured didn't break me. It revealed me. It burned away everything that was superficial and left behind an iron core of will. For months, my mind was a battlefield, and my only weapon was a single blink. It taught me that strength isn't about the power you wield over others, but the absolute sovereignty you hold over your own spirit, even when your body is a cage. I learned that you can't control what others do to you, but you have ultimate power over how you respond. You can let the darkness consume you, or you can choose to become a source of light for someone else. I chose light. My story could have ended in that hospital room, a silent victim of a bitter conspiracy. But instead, it begins now, with every step I take with my cane, with every family we help through the Caspian Initiative, with every quiet moment I share with Daniel, watching the sun set over the harbor. It's a life I fought for, a life I clawed my way back to from the very edge of oblivion. And it is more precious and beautiful than I ever could have imagined. The story of what happened to me is a dark one, but the story of what came after is one I'm still writing every day. It's a story of choosing light over darkness. If you believe that our deepest scars can become our greatest strengths, then I hope you'll join me on this journey. Please, subscribe to the channel, and let's create a community that reminds each other that we are never truly alone. Thank you for listening.